The cabin of the late-night flight from New York to Los Angeles was meant to be calm, a place where the wealthy passengers in first class could stretch out and enjoy champagne, warm towels, and the kind of quiet luxury money could buy. But instead of the soft hum of the engines and clinking of glasses, the air was filled with the desperate wails of a baby who refused to stop crying. Heads turned, eyebrows furrowed, and sighs echoed through the cabin as people shifted uncomfortably in their leather seats. At the center of the storm sat Daniel Harrington, a millionaire whose face had once been splashed across business magazines as one of the youngest tech investors to ever build an empire. But tonight, Daniel didn't feel powerful. His daughter, barely a year old, squirmed and screamed in his arms, her little fists flailing, her face red from exhaustion. No amount of rocking, shushing, or bottle feeding seemed to calm her. Flight attendants rushed to his side, offering pacifiers, toys, even warm milk, but the baby's cries only grew louder. Daniel could feel the glares of the other passengers pressing down on him, a silent chorus of judgment. For years he had believed money could solve anything. Hire the right staff, buy the right tools, secure the right services. But here, in the confined space of an airplane, his wealth was useless. He whispered softly to his baby girl, begging her to calm down, his voice cracking under the weight of helplessness. As the cries grew sharper, the tension in the cabin thickened. A man in the back muttered something about spoiled rich kids. A woman rolled her eyes and pulled a silk eye mask over her face with dramatic annoyance. Daniel's cheeks burned with shame, and for the first time in years, he felt small, powerless, and exposed. The baby's cries were not just noise anymore. They were a spotlight on his own vulnerability. Across the aisle, near the row where economy passengers had been upgraded last minute to fill empty seats, sat a boy no older than 10. His clothes were faded, the collar of his t-shirt stretched out, and his sneakers looked like they had been worn by more than one child before him. Beside him sat his mother, a tired woman with worry lines carved into her face, clutching a worn handbag as though it were her most precious possession. They didn't fit into the polished world of first-class passengers, but the airline had made a mistake with seating arrangements, and now they sat among the elite. The boy, however, didn't seem to notice the glares or judgment from others. His eyes were fixed on Daniel's baby, and instead of annoyance, his face showed something else, compassion. He leaned slightly toward his mother and whispered, "Mama, she's so upset. Can I help?" His mother squeezed his hand and shook her head gently, but the boy kept watching. He remembered nights back home in their small apartment, when his baby brother would cry endlessly, and he would rock him to sleep while his mama worked late shifts at the diner. He knew the rhythm of a lullaby could work miracles, the way soft humming could slow a baby's frantic heartbeat. Minutes passed, the cries never easing, and the murmurs around the cabin grew louder. Daniel buried his face in his hands, trying to hide his tears of frustration. It was then that the boy, with a kind of courage that seemed far beyond his years, stood up. His legs trembled slightly, but his resolve did not. He walked slowly toward Daniel, every eye in the cabin following his small frame. Clearing his throat, he looked up at the wealthy man whose suit probably cost more than his family's monthly rent, and said in a quiet but steady voice, "Sir, may I try?" The entire cabin froze. For a long moment, Daniel just stared at the boy, unsure whether he had heard correctly. The idea of handing his fragile, screaming daughter to a complete stranger, a child, no less, seemed absurd. His instincts screamed at him to hold on tighter, to protect her, to push the boy gently back to his seat. But as Daniel looked into the boy's eyes, he saw no judgment, no impatience like the other passengers, only a quiet confidence and an empathy that somehow pierced through the chaos. His daughter's cries rattled in his ears like a drum, and desperation made him pause. Slowly, reluctantly, Daniel nodded. With hands that trembled slightly, he placed the tiny, wailing bundle into the boy's waiting arms. The cabin went silent, the tension so thick it seemed the whole plane held its breath. The boy adjusted his grip with surprising care, rocking the baby with movements that looked practiced, almost natural. Then, softly at first, he began to hum. It wasn't a polished lullaby or a tune anyone recognized. It was raw and simple, the kind of song a child might invent on nights when the world felt too big and noisy. Yet his voice was steady, soothing, and full of warmth. To everyone's astonishment, the baby's cries began to soften. Her tiny fists unclenched, her red face relaxed, and within moments the cabin that had been echoing with shrieks was now filled with gentle humming and the quiet sound of the infant's breathing. Gasps rippled through the passengers. A woman in pearls pressed a hand to her chest and whispered, "Unbelievable." A man who had been grumbling earlier actually sat forward, watching in awe. Even the flight attendants, who had tried everything in their training manuals, looked at each other as though witnessing a small miracle. Daniel could only stare, his mouth open, as his daughter, his stubborn, inconsolable daughter, nuzzled against the chest of a boy who barely reached his shoulder and fell into a deep, peaceful sleep. Daniel felt tears prick his eyes, not from embarrassment this time, but from humility. How did you do that?" he asked in a broken whisper, almost afraid his voice would disturb the fragile peace. The boy looked up shyly, his eyes darting for a moment toward his mother before returning to Daniel. "My baby brother cries a lot," he explained softly. "Mama works late, so I take care of him. Babies just need to feel safe, sir. They need love." His words were simple, but they struck Daniel harder than any lecture or life lesson ever had. For years, Daniel had equated love with providing lavish gifts, private schools, the best nannies money could hire. He had measured care in dollars, thinking it was enough. But watching his daughter find peace in the arms of a boy who owned nothing but a tattered backpack, he realized how empty that philosophy was. The boy had nothing to give except his presence, his patience, and his song, and somehow that had been worth more than all of Daniel's wealth. A murmur of soft applause spread through the cabin. Passengers who had been rolling their eyes minutes earlier now looked at the boy with admiration. One woman dabbed at her eyes with a napkin, whispering, "What an angel." The boy's mother pulled him back gently, pride shining in her tired eyes. Daniel looked at her too, and in her weary but dignified posture he saw the kind of strength that came not from money but from sacrifice and love. When the plane finally touched down hours later, Daniel sought out the boy and his mother before they disembarked. He crouched down to the boy's level, his voice thick with emotion. "You reminded me tonight what really matters. I owe you more than I can say." The boy only shrugged, embarrassed by the attention, but Daniel pressed on, promising quietly to ensure they would not struggle again. For the first time in his life, Daniel realized he didn't want to just give money. He wanted to give opportunities, to give care, to give genuine kindness. That night, a millionaire walked onto a plane certain that wealth was his greatest asset. By the time he stepped off, he knew his greatest lesson had come not from boardrooms or bankers, but from a poor little boy who had done the unthinkable, quieted a crying baby, and awakened a father's heart.